Hi, team. Welcome to the Escape Podcast for Star Wars: The Old Republic. Today, we take a look at the many posts we have seen so far on class balance. Our broadcast astromech today is EPC 199. And with me, as always, is Seema. Hi, Seema. How's it going?
Hey Max, it's actually going, pretty well. I've spent some time gambling, like I said I would. Um, I have kind of in my mind set aside maybe like 5 million credits to gamble, but I don't know if I'll do quite that many just time-wise. So far, I think I've done about 400K, and I'm not too sure on the amount, but I've gotten 11 of the certificates. So however much gambling you'd have to do, you know, you to get that many, which isn't a lot, but I mean, so it's enough to buy my dance floor that I want for sure,
Nice.
and the microphone. So, um, but I want to get the companion. That's what I'm after. And then let's see, we've done some ops this week with MFN, our mandatory fun night. We went to Ravagers and we got to Master and Blaster, which has been our nemesis in previous runs, and we actually did okay. We didn't get them down, but we were doing that thing where you make fewer and fewer mistakes and improve a little bit each one, but we just ran out of time. So, but to me, that's kind of the fun part about rating is that those incremental, getting a little better each time you try something. And MFN, the nature of the beast, because we have different people all the time. Um, that's just how it works out. But it was very fun. And then we cheated tonight on our LOL team and we went back to that same instance of Ravagers and just finished it out for fun. So we got that going for us. And then we did some other like lair bosses tonight. We went and did Deborah's Courtyard, and then we went and knocked our heads a few times against is it the Colossal Monolith or is that the one that's outside?
I think, well, it's either the World Breaker or the Colossal, and I keep forgetting which one
Yeah,
is inside and which one is
yeah, me
outside.
too. Right. It was
But
the
yes,
inside
we
one
went to the
anyways.
inside one.
Meaning the one that's inside an instance with the color circles and the
Yeah.
stuff and the things.
Yeah, which
But yeah,
in story mode is actually pretty hard. So if you're
yeah.
looking for sort of like the in between story mode and veteran, go do Colossal Monolith, and then you'll see if your team is ready to be graduating to veteran modes of various ops. I also see that you are on, which I know I think there's reasons for it. You are on your Sork at the moment, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
You're saying farewell to the Sork because it's going to get nerfed, isn't it? So we'll talk a little
Yes,
bit
I'm
about
going to
that.
be deleting her after this. So
Yeah, me too. I'm gonna delete my Merc because it's getting nerfed too. So yeah, I had a good week. We did, as you said, we did Ravagers. That was fun. It was fun starting Ravagers. Just 16 man with Master Blaster is just crazy because you got 16 people, you got all the circles, you got people running all around, and then you got all those orange circles. And we have people that aren't, that aren't even geared or augmented because people are bringing new characters and trying to level them up, and so that fight always gets a little crazy. So
it's
we,
so much. It was such sharp contrast when we did it tonight than on 8 man, how much
yeah,
room you have to
yes.
move around.
Absolutely. Very roomy, and we just murdered Master Blaster and just destroyed Koratani and cleared that up. So that was fun. I did fly some GSF as I've been doing every week. That continues to be fun. I still like the bomber. That's my main ship of choice at the moment. I know a lot of people have gotten their own ships, their extra ships that have been part of the last patch. So take a look. If you have not checked your hangar, you should have 2 new ships in there if you had not had them before. And that gives you a little opportunity to try out some new things. The bombers are pretty fun. The gunships are also quite fun, and it's pretty easy to do to contribute pretty well on a completely blank gunship. So you could take a look at that and try it out. But we have a bunch of news to get into. We're mostly going to focus on the feedback posts in the news, and then we'll get into the balanced discussion after that. But yeah, let's take a look at that news.
Now, an Imperial News Network report.
So first up, just minor news. They put out a post that said they're going to be embargoing quite a few items on the cartel market, which is fine. I didn't see anything that was going to make me too sad that they were embargoing it. It's a bunch of stuff that it's some of it's been out for a long, long time. Some of it's old. Like the Carbonite Chamber is quite old. The Rancor Hollow Replica is quite old. Kick the Hut Ball. So toys, armor, mounts, bunch of stuff is getting embargoed. Was anything out of this very interesting to you, Seema?
No, not really. I mean, I think yeah, I think that they're fine to embargo them. I
Yeah,
wish they would bring some stuff back, actually. I don't get excited when they embargo stuff. I would love to see the Revan statue come back briefly, for instance.
I think that would be quite interesting to many people. It's very
Yeah.
functional. It's one of those really functional toys that'd be nice to have. I have one, of course. So it's great to be able to pop that out and have a a vendor where you can do repairs just sitting out there in the middle of your operations group. Also, in the news, what else did we see, Seema? We started to see these feedback posts, right? So why don't we go through
Yes.
them?
So a player posted asking how feedback was actually how the community's feedback it plays a role in decision making, and Eric responded saying that's a really good question. Let's make it this week's discussion topic. So there were sort of semi-major posts from Eric and from Keith and from Charles on this topic of feedback. And Charles's example of he took Knights of the Fallen Empire and Knights of the Eternal Throne as an example of how feedback works into the creative process of stories. And one of the things he mentioned was that in his post, he goes over the kind of feedback they saw after Coffee, which was that the story seemed to move slowly, coming out once a month, and that people didn't enjoy the the chapters that were specifically designed to bring a companion back just seemed to halt the forward process of the story. So when it came time to do Knights of the Eternal Throne, they collapsed it a little bit. They didn't do the chapters that brought companions back, and they told the story at a more accelerated pace. And he also said, which I did not realize this, and I thought this was kind of interesting, that they originally envisioned the whole story to be in three parts, but they thought that that was people were wanting it at a faster pace, so they collapsed Knights of the Eternal Throne down into one instead of two parts.
Right. Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't realize that they had done that. I I'm sort of glad because I think three parts, which would potentially have spanned over, 2 years or 2.5 years, would have been quite long for that story. So I'm glad we got through it. Um,
Yeah,
there was a
but
lot
I
of
do think
criticism.
some issues of some parts of the story are a little bit confusing because they happened without maybe as much connective tissue as it could have had.
Yeah, 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 and I think that's one of that's sort of what you get is as you constrain that, you have less room to sort of develop the story in the way that they would want to. Which is interesting. I also think there's a lot of criticism in the thread of, well, I wish you would have put the character the the companion stories, companion chapters back in. Wish you would have kept them. We really wanted the companions to come back. However, we know there was tons and tons of feedback of the first time around in Knights of the Fallen Empire that, hey, it was really too long. You have these side
Right,
chapters where we're dealing with
right.
whatever companion. Maybe if you think it would be your favorite companion that you want back, it would be fine. But when it's a companion where you got to go deal with, I don't know, Skadge or whatever, you're not going to be as excited about wasting a whole month and a whole chapter on a story about Skadge. So I don't know if that's really if what you're asking for is really what you would have wanted in
And
that.
there's a lot of I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but there's a lot of nostalgia out there for early SWTOR where there were the class stories. And
Yeah,
I I don't know that I totally see that.
right,
Um, yeah. I mean,
right.
when you read a book, it doesn't have. I mean, a very special book constructed a certain way might have the same story told, or versions of the story told in 8 ways. But a good story doesn't have to be. You can have a good story, and it could be the same story for everyone. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Um, so I saved a couple rants for tonight's podcast also, and one of them
Oh,
relates
sweet.
to story. So that we also saw in relation to the story, multiple posts in some of those threads that were saying, and damn it, BioWare, you better explain to me how you kept saying choices matter, because choices absolutely did not matter. They didn't matter at all. Everybody ended up sort of in the same place, which I guess there's still a tiny bit of a point there. We did all sort of end up in the same place because we can't like blow up Coruscant for some people and not for others. So here's what I invented. So it's not really a rant, but I've got a solution to this. So for the people that really wanted choices to matter, here's the deal. To do this, if you killed Kaleo, then you have to delete all your credits on the character that you killed Kaleo on, because then it'll matter. And she had a plan,
Right.
and that was her failsafe, and you killed her, and she bankrupts you as a result. If you knelt to Valkorion in the very beginning of the story, then by the end of the story, you have to randomly delete one of your alts because sacrifices are required. If you killed Arkin, then you have to delete your character at the end of the story because you don't have Arkin to help you in the Valkorion fight, so you're going to have to sacrifice yourself to defeat Valkorion. It only makes sense.
Right. Right.
If you killed Jorgen or Vet, then you have to delete your weapon just to honor them because they liked weapons. If you killed Torian, you have to delete your armor because you're gonna put that in his burial,
Right. And you're banished from Mandalore.
and you're banished from Mandalore. If you killed Koth, you have to buy a speeder for every or some kind of ship for every person in your guild as reparations. If you killed Scorpio, then you can never summon any of your droid companions ever again, because now they're all short-circuited and destroyed as part of Backlash. So there you go. If you want to make it feel like it matters, do that. That
Right.
I can't imagine what people, when they say, I wanted choices to matter, what they were looking for. And so there you go. Then it would feel like it matters, right? So do that. Do that. Delete your character. Then it'll matter. So that's that one.
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, because the choices that matter are going to be in the story. They aren't going to be choices that affect your character because no one wants that.
And it's not going to be Valkorion lives and Arkin lives and they're still out there fighting the Empire. Because you can't get to the end of a storyline and have some people not at the end of the storyline. So I don't really know what people were looking for there. So that was Charles. Keith also responded, and Keith talked about what his view of feedback was. And as you'd expect, sort of as the producer, most of his ideas around story or around feedback were getting feedback around gameplay ideas and improvements, around likes and dislikes of content, gameplay, ensuring that he's keeping an eye out on how well the communication from the dev team to the community is going. So the kinds of things that we've seen Keith respond to already in talking about gameplay and talking about some of the changes, and also the new cadence of communication, we're certainly seeing improvements around that. That's what Keith is focused on. So Charles is focused on the story and really looks through all of the feedback from multiple sources from a story perspective. Keith detailed how he's looking at it from a producer's perspective, and it makes sense.
And then Eric's post was about, his job and the role he plays and how he gathers feedback from the community. And he said his role is he takes part in a lot of meetings that have to do with, you know, from brainstorming to development to, game features to story to everything else. And his job is to sort of bring the player point of view and be the sort of, he said litmus test, but like the canary in the room that if, he falls over and dies, then maybe it was not a good idea. And he gathers his feedback from the forums, as you might expect, and from Reddit, and they kind of consider those two like similar or maybe the same thing even, like to the extent where it's probably the same players posting in both places or the same sort of community of players posting in both places, forums users, in other words. They also look at social media, what people say and ask about on Twitter and Facebook. And then the influencers, which is a group of content creators, people that make content around SWTOR, and they watch their content, and unlike what people are starting to believe, the influencers are people that I think BioWare feels have some influence on the players, not that they have influence on BioWare necessarily. And then they also use focus groups, which they talk to focus groups, they said, along every point of the development cycle. So it could be in the very early stages or it could be in the very late stages. So that's how they gather feedback.
I like the idea of Eric being, and a couple people even said, I think Eric should really be a champion and a representative of the players. And I think that's what he said he does. He tries to come at it from, here's what I'm hearing from the community, here's the player's perspective, let me bring that to the conversation and be a champion for the individual player. Now, one of the problems with that is you might say that, well, Eric isn't my kind of player, he doesn't play like me. However, they did talk about in some of these threads about how each of them sort of plays the game. In fact, there was another post that said, do you guys even play? Of course. Do you guys even play? And the answer is yes. Keith has multiple characters at command rank 300. Eric plays much more casually and does not have any characters at command rank 300, but plays every day still. So they play in different ways. There's different players playing in different ways and bringing that perspective to the development process. So don't think that they don't. So rant number 2. Within this sort of discussion of feedback, there were multiple people, and in fact, Keith tried to respond directly to some of these, of people saying, darn it, you didn't respond to me personally, and I don't feel like my feedback is being listened to, and you are a horrible game company as a result. And I think that is ridiculous. I don't think so. We're influencers, and I have no expectation that anything that I would say, or even PM to Eric or Keith, that they have any obligation whatsoever to respond to us or me, even as quote unquote influencers. They have millions of people providing them feedback. There is no possible way that they could be replying or responding or personally addressing every bit of feedback. Plus, they can't make you feel like your feedback was listened to, because I guarantee you any piece of feedback you give, some other person has already also responded with a completely contradictory bit of feedback. Right. I need chapters that have, that bring back more companions. Someone also sent in a piece of feedback that says, I need chapters that, I need no chapters ever again that have anything to do with companions. So what are they supposed to do? So this also made me think about other parallel situations, like the time I emailed George R.R. Martin, and he will just not reply to my personal email, and he's not listening to my feedback on handling character deaths and his slowness to produce new content. He's not releasing content in a timely manner, and I have spent money on subscriptions to HBO to consume his content, and he just will not reply to me. That is horrible. Number one.
Well, he is horrible, but
well, he's a horrible person. He's killed too many of my favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, so I PM'd Tim Cook as soon as I heard that the iPhone 7 wouldn't have a headphone jack. And you know what they did? Not only did he not reply to me personally, but they went right ahead and they removed the headphone jack. Can you believe it? Apple is a horrible company, and I have spent literally thousands and thousands of dollars on their products and hardware. They should reply to me, respond.
These are terrible examples because Apple is a horrible company.
They are also horrible. But this is what people are expecting from BioWare. I mean, do they post on Reddit? Tim Cook is terrible. I PM'd him, and I feel like my feedback is not being listened to. Maybe they do. Maybe it's the same people and they're doing the same things. George R. R. Martin, you are not replying to me. Why is A Dance with Dragons had not been released yet? Blah blah blah. Maybe. So anyway, maybe
I- Sometimes I think there's a big disconnect between what some people consider feedback to be and what feedback actually is, because feedback is one factor in the design of a game. It isn't you provide the feedback and then they do what you wanted.
yeah.
And
I
if they
mean,
don't, then they're not listening to you.
yeah. Feedback is one data point on a massive scatter chart of what's coming in from all of these different sources, which in streaming in massive magnitudes of data points. So you're one little dot on that million point scatter chart. So deal with it, I guess, to sum it up. Uh, so just to wrap up the news, this schedule is still out there. Things are still happening. We do have the Narshada nightlife event that will still continue throughout the summer. We do know that coming up on Tuesday, there will be a back-end maintenance, but no patch that'll be going on Tuesday. So a little bit of work going on. Also
Yep, the
next week,
27th.
yep, starting on the 27th. Now, this is also weird. I don't know if they corrected it, but they said from the 27th to July 11th will be a bounty contract week. That's not a week, so I don't know how, but maybe because it's going over 4th of July, they just said
Yeah,
they're going to let it
yeah.
ride.
I was
Yeah,
wondering
maybe
that
that's
too.
it. Because they're not going to come in on the 4th to do the back end tweak to shut off the event potentially. So maybe it will. Maybe it'll
Yeah,
run 2 weeks.
they need an app for that
They need they need an app
so
for
they
that.
can do it from the barbecue.
They need robotic process automation. That's something I do at work lately. RPA. Yeah, robots to take over their jobs, and then we can just complain to the robots, and they will completely ignore us because that's what they do as they take over our world. And finally, a little bit of a bonus over the 4th of July weekend from the 1st to the 5th. We'll get double XP and double Valor, so you got that to look forward to. How about some guild and community news, Seema?
Just want to say that, let's see, Conquest this week is a new one called Plunder of Iocath. There's only one planet, of course, and it's Iocath. Repeatable things include crafting this week. So if you were waiting for a crafting week, this is it. It's also, I believe it's still just 20,000 points to get to. Only one invasion force, though. Also repeatable, the group finder stuff, and the weekly missions for flashpoints, tacticals, and ups. There's also, you can get conquest points for doing the weekly Alliance Divided, which I believe is the IOCAth weekly, and also, as always, repeatable war zones and GSF.
Yes, come fly GSF. Come shoot me. I had somebody say, somebody whispered me, and I think I was in PvP, and they said, "Oh, are you Max the Gray?" Yeah, I listen to your podcast. Thumbs up. Also, every time I see you in a war zone, I make sure to come and kill you. I'm like, all right, good times. That's great. That's good to know. Thanks. But
But for some
I
reason,
welcome that, so that's fine.
um, I just popped into my head too. Next week, or the week of July the 4th, we won't be having MFN. That's not this coming week, but the week after. So just a heads up.
Yes. Yes, we were talking about that earlier. Our Canadian friend Apples was reminding us that there's some sort of American holiday. And then we asked if there was July the 4th in Canada, which of course there is not. They just go from the 3rd to the 5th. That's how it works there.
Yes.
That's one of those brain
Okay,
teasers
Dad.
like how many months have 28 days? Well, all of
All
them.
of them. Yeah.
All right, let's get into some the good and the bad and the ugly of all of this balancing stuff that we've heard about. So for those of you that don't know what that little sound effect was, ask your grandparents. I, although I did grow up watching that, like on the UHF channels, the old Clint Eastwood, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly um, shows, and Fistful of Dollars, and all the other good old Clint Eastwood movies. So, good and the bad and the ugly of class changes, and they are coming. We received quite a few posts on this, so it's been pretty interesting, and we may talk about this over a couple times. Maybe we'll wait till more of the class change detail posts come out on individual classes and do a follow-up episode in a couple weeks on that. But what we got a few weeks back was an overview of changes this summer. So they detailed some of the classes that are up for changes. They announced that they're going to be looking at Sork and Sage, mostly Madness Balance and Corruption Seer. They're going to look at Power Tech and Vanguard. They're going to look at Assassin and Shadow. They're mostly focused on, and Sniper Gunslinger, Merc Commando, a couple of the disciplines within each. And what they said was, we're going to look at these disciplines. We're in a stage of tuning, and we're going after target healing, DPS, mostly healing and DPS targets for these different classes. Some of them need to go up a little bit. Some of them need to go down a little bit. So that was the start. What they've done from there is they've done a really good job, I think, and we're going to go through it in detail, of talking about how class balance happens and how they go about it and what their strategy is and why they're doing it and why they're doing it this way. So I really appreciated all of the communication that's going on. It's been pretty transparent on their process. I still have questions, and that will go through, and maybe, you know, just a little bit of wishes that they would do things a little bit differently, especially since my Merc is getting nerfed, and Seema's Sage is getting nerfed. But we'll talk about that too. So what was your general impression of this series of posts that's come out so far, Seema?
Um, well, I like, well, my first two comments that are, I like the detail of it. And I also like at the end where they put the little dev notes where they say what they were after and why they did it and the effect they think it'll have, instead of it just happening and then it's left to the community to fill in those blanks, which they never do in a happy way, or we never do in a happy way, I should say.
Right, right. So that detail at least gives you the context of what's going on under the covers. Still gives you opportunity to question that context, but it's there.
Right.
So what did they say to kick it off? Even in that original post, they did a little bit of why, and what about what's missing, and and then the roadmap for the detailed breakdown of changes. Do you want to sort of go through that a little bit, and then what Keith said about it? Because I think that gets to a couple of the questions that I had right off.
Are you talking about Sork and Sage specifically? Or
Well, a couple of the key starting comments were, why are these disciplines being looked at over any others? So to that, they said, between data and player feedback, these are the disciplines that seem to be most in need of change. So when we get down to how they judge that, they looked at the ones that were most outside the margin.
right. Okay, I'm with you now.
Yeah.
And what I always think about when I see that is I'm really curious about what kind of data they look at, but I guess we'll never know, but I do wonder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty familiar with the player feedback.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, for better or for worse, player feedback isn't the most scientific approach. You can't just go based on player feedback by any means.
No, because for one, there's no good way to get player feedback from a large sample. People sometimes say, why don't you put a survey that people have to fill when they log in or whatever? But surveys are sometimes a terrible way of getting information because it takes a special skill set to write ones that elicit the information you actually want instead of some other information. And people answer them in a way to, they sometimes answer the question that they wish had been asked rather than the question that was asked.
Right.
So, yeah. But to just sort of move on, they did say about the classes and disciplines that weren't added that they doesn't mean they can't add them, or they'll never make changes to them. It's just it's just the other ones they've considered more topical, more important to do first.
Yeah. Right. Right. Exactly. So I like Keith's little clarification on that. that this is only the start, and they will potentially get to more of them. I I think they could have still prioritized a couple of the other ones that could really use some buffs, like TK, Lightning, Sork Sage. That's not currently on the first round list, and that probably could have used a buff, I think, in the first round. But he said there's still an opportunity that they could potentially pull that in. They want to make tweaks to operative and scoundrel healing, but that's not on the list yet. They could pull that in. So all of this is going to be is going to be put into a queue, and they may shuffle that as they go through the summer and pull a couple of those other ones in. So they're being clear about it. They're being clear about what they're starting with, why they're starting with it. So I guess let's get into how class balance happens. That big long post. So if you look at it on the forums, this is a great one to go through and read up on in detail, and gets to the basis of why. And I think as you go through this and as we talk about it, you'll see sort of why they picked some of these classes first off.
Mm-hmm.
First, just kicking it off, and maybe you can go through it a little bit, but I think this was written up by the not by Keith or Charles or Eric. I think this was written up by the couple developers that work on combat balance, because Eric sort of posted it on behalf, and if you sort of look at it how he did it, he quoted it out of them posting,
Right.
them like it looked like them they sent him an email, and he
Right.
posted it on their behalf, and it's signed Your Friendly Neighborhood Combat Team. So that's interesting. But yeah, so do you want to sort of kick off into some of this detail of what they put into this post and why it looks interesting?
Well, one of the first things they said was that they don't when they talk about class balance, they don't necessarily say we're comparing this class to that class and seeing, making sure the one's not better than the other, but they look at each class and they see if they make certain targets based on the type of damage or healing or tanking they're supposed to be doing. In other words, whether it's where they're ranged or melee, or if they're predominantly burst or sustained, and do they meet those targets? And so if they don't, then they make adjustments.
Right. So I thought so. So first off, I didn't realize that they were so, in some ways, somewhat granular and specific about what their targets were for melee versus this quasi melee burst, melee sustain versus melee quasi burst versus melee versus range sustain versus ranged quasi sustain versus ranged burst. And across that spectrum, so what they said was they need to give some sort of, they feel like they need to give some sort of multiplier to melee. Basically, you could think of it as melee needs a multiplier and should sort of be on the higher end because they have to do more work to stay in range, and because the bosses move around and ads move around, there's time lost as you transition from target to target.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're one of those classes, you should have a little bit higher sustained damage. You should be at sort of at the higher end because it averages out then to a to a baseline as you lose lose some global cooldowns moving around. Okay, that makes sense. And then on the other side, as you're ranged, if you're ranged sustain versus ranged burst, you should get a little bit of a discount. You should be a little bit under to start because ranged burst can switch targets really fast. They can just stay at range and they can switch targets really fast. So they should be a little bit under so that, again, everything in theory averages out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a fine approach. And you can see all the classes they sort of put into these categories to sort of make up this approach. I think so. I don't know. I feel like a lot of what they're doing around this though is based on math and parsing, and not necessarily as much on what happens in the real world. Maybe some though, and they're smart people, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But for them to say that a melee sustained or a melee quasi burst should be 7.5 to 10% higher damage than a Arsenal Merc, which is what I play, makes makes things like PvP seem to put Merc damage, especially after they're going to nerf it now, at a relatively big disadvantage. So that's saying things like, here you got a Fury Marauder, or even Vengeance Juggernauts being 10%, just baseline should be 10% higher damage, because once you start figuring in things like utilities, which they're not, which isn't part of this calculus, there's a lot of opportunity for a Vengeance Juggernaut to be in the face of a Merc, and also stunning and slowing and rooting the Merc, and then pushing the Merc, and then leaping to the Merc again. And I rarely fight Marauders and Juggernauts not in melee range.
Right.
So maybe they lose a global cooldown or two if I can maybe try to kite them a little bit, or if I find that, if I manage to get a stun off on them. But it's not very long, and it's not very much. So I don't feel like I have some 10% advance, 10% bonus on them. So I don't know if, when you figure in those utilities, if that's really realistic. But maybe it is. I don't know. What's your sort of thought on that whole range? That 10% range seems high to me. I
It
could say a
does.
couple percent, but
I guess what I think about it is the way it was worded, it seems like they're thinking PvE. Like when they say um, sustained damage is disadvantaged because it takes several seconds to ramp up to its full damage potential each time it acquires a new target. And in situations where rapid target switching is required, it will often never reach its full damage potential. That seems like they're thinking PvE. I mean,
mm-hmm.
PvP, yes, you have to do rapid target switching, but it just seems like PvE language. So
Yes.
I, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so I don't know.
10% does seem like a lot for PvP for sure.
And it also, I mean, even in PvE, it seems like a lot, because while there are fights where you have to do rapid target switching, again, if it's depending on the rate of target switching, all of those classes have gotten their gap closers sort of amped up and amplified, especially with utilities.
But
So I
it's not only switching targets, it's also getting out of stuff.
right, right. So I'm thinking like the Tithe fight. The Tithe fight, you have like the guardian, a bunch of ads, various kinds of ads spawning. I know it's annoying. I play Power Tech quite a bit, DPS Power Tech. It was always annoying when you had lots of ads spawning in random places around the map, and you get that a little bit in the Tithe fight, because the four ads spawn, like 30 yards it's sort of like it's about a 45 radius circle, and at 4 points on that 45-yard radius circle, 45-meter radius circle, you're getting a bunch of ads spawning, and then the boss is off to the side being tanked. To try to run around, especially if your leap is on cooldown, and try to physically run around to get some of those ads, you do waste a lot of time in DPS. And now, since they took, especially with some of those classes that had a little bit of a ranged damage ability to throw out, and they nerfed some of those, they got rid of some of those in the last round of expansion. That does make that more difficult, and it's frustrating. However, they did up, and I have utilities on my power tech to be doing multiple jumps and have a lower cooldown on leaps and things like that, that make that, sort of mitigate that. That said, it certainly is easier. It's definitely more relaxing on my mercenary, because I don't have to be running around. I don't know that my output is all that much more on my mercenary, though. Just in terms of damage, it's more comfortable, and I don't have to worry about running around. But I don't think I'm doing 10% more damage necessarily than if I had tuned up a high, an equivalent damage melee class. And I'm not going to say power tech, because they're not equivalent damage yet, and they're actually getting buffed. But I don't know if it's 10% as much of a difference. Again, though, in PvP, it's a slightly different story. So one of the questions that was asked in the chat room, which is related, what was, well, why aren't they looking at the utilities? So utilities add a whole different twist to this, and a lot of the utilities are sort of focused on what happens in PvP. And what they said was, and I buy this to some degree, is first let's do this PvE style, or just the damage, healing per second, damage per second calculus on how we should be tuning these classes slightly. And once that's done, get a feel for how these classes are performing in things like PvP before we start messing with those levers as well. So I agree with that to some degree. You could feel like mercs have too much survivability, but if their damage gets pulled back, and then maybe their survivability doesn't matter as much anymore. So
Right.
we'll need to sort of wait to see what that looks like. So I
Right.
buy that a little bit.
I mean, and that is part of the reaction to the proposed Merc changes is Merc commando changes is they're nerfing the damage, and the community is like, well, we didn't want you to nerf their damage necessarily, or we don't care about that. We wanted you to nerf their defensives.
Right. Right. Because it's mostly PvPers saying it's too damn hard to kill a merc. And that gets back to your first point, Seema, I think, which was if you survey the community, I don't think you're necessarily getting the true answer. You're getting perception, which is not necessarily equivalent to reality. So in PvP, people have been, saying, mercs need to be nerfed, mercs need to be nerfed. Part of that is because I think because last, pre 5.0, mercs were really easy to kill. It was really fast to kill. You would always target the merc first. You could burst down a merc because they didn't have the defensive cooldowns, and you'd kill them first because they did they did okay damage, but everybody could kill a merc really fast. So you got to this expansion and it took longer to kill a merc. Not that you couldn't do as much damage as a merc, and a lot of the classes can, but because now it's harder than it was before, the response was, oh, you got to nerf mercs because I used to be able to just destroy them, and they were a waste to play, and I hated playing my merc in PvP. So the perception was, oh, nerf those defensive cooldowns because I can't kill them in 2 seconds anymore. Well, the reality
Right.
was that time to kill was too fast on a merc. Maybe it's slightly too long now, or maybe it's actually okay. And if we pull their damage back a little bit, maybe it'll actually be really, really good. But we won't be able to tell that until we only pull one of the levers.
Right.
So we're not going to get into it in this episode, but we'll start breaking down some of these in more detail. And this idea of pulling what levers you're pulling, I think, is very apparent if you look at the post that just came out
Yeah.
on on Sorks. Healing Sorks. Do you feel like they're pulling a lot of levers, Seema, on
Oh,
Sorks?
if you read through the post, it's like they're touching every ability. They're reducing every ability or making it more expensive to cast.
Right. Yeah, all of that. Every ability is either getting nerfed or more expensive in force cost. All of them. I'm like, look at this whole list. This is crazy. So this I'm really worried about because how many levers are you pulling? So yes, I'm glad they're not touching utilities yet on any of these because I think that's too many levers, too many levers to be pulling. Let's see how it shakes out. Here I am punching my microphone. I'm so so riled up about this. Um, so look at all this stuff that all of these levers that they're pulling in the negative direction on Sorks. I'm afraid that Sorks are just going to be nerfed to the ground, and no one is going to play Sorks anymore. I think this is relatively dangerous. Now, maybe their math, so that this is another one of my mini questions related to this, and maybe you can answer it, Seema. I don't know why you would, but I'll address it to you. So if you have enough math, if you have enough calculus behind the scenes that you can say that these are all of the levers that you need to pull, and you know what this is going to do to the healing per second of Sorks, and you're going to force cost and all of these healings, and you know the math that this is going to put them in the right place, why did it take why did, number one, why did the class ever get released in this state, for one? And for two, why did it take 7 months if you had all of this math that you could just do to bother to make this change? So answer me that, Seema.
Well, yeah, I mean that is the question, right? And if they have all this data that they can go to, why did they release it the way it is now anyway, if their data tells them it's not good?
Right. Now they say that they're doing this based on, so what did they say? So they said we do this based on data, we do this based on performance in the real world, and we do this based on player feedback. I'm afraid that some of this is based on bad data, which is what is the flavor of the month. So if everybody's playing Sorks in PvP, ranked PvP, for example, maybe they're going to pull the lever extra hard because they want to, balance that out, and they want people to be playing all three, healer types. That's not necessarily the way to optimize. I don't think, and I don't think they should be using that data, because here's
You
what's,
know,
yeah, what is your perspective?
well, what it reminds me of is remember when the slot machines came out that you could put in your stronghold and people started playing with them and the rate of return was really, really high. And people started saying, hey, you guys should look at this, it's too high. And they said, oh, no, 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 working as intended. We see it. It's the way it's supposed to be. And then like a day later, they're like, yeah, this is way too high. And they, instead of adjusting it down, they just took it down to like zero. Now you can't, now they're worthless.
Right.
Nothing can happen to those machines.
So
So
yeah,
there's no tweaking. It's just all or nothing.
so I certainly hope that that's not where this is going to go, and it almost looks like, we're heading in that direction with Sorks and Sages. The other thing that I think is part of this deal is the if there's even a 0.001% difference between a Sork's performance and a operative's performance as a healer in a ranked team, you're going to get a lot more people playing Sork. Because even if the simulation says it's 0.001, so they're really, by rounding error, they're equal. Because
Right.
there's even the smallest difference, and somebody does that math, and somebody posts on the forums, and everybody hears that, it's 0.001, but it's a tiny bit better. Mine goes to 11. Then everybody's going to play Sorks, right?
Right.
That
Right.
doesn't mean that
Because
Sorks need to be nerfed.
it's because
That's
when you put them in a list, they're going to be in that order. It's just like on the GTN where the thing that costs 1 credit less is
right.
is first in the list. Doesn't mean it's a better deal because 1 credit is just 1 credit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I hope their decisions for how they're going about this, I hope the part of it that's based on feedback and perception is super, super small. And I'm afraid it's not.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
afraid it's like, because of the perception and how many people are playing it, and how many Sorks, and how few operatives we see, and how many Sorks we see. We're gonna have to nerf Sorks. Oh, yeah, we gotta go nerf them. I hope it's not that. And again, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and maybe it's not, and maybe that maybe this is all fine, and it's a very reasonable nerf. It doesn't seem reasonable, but we'll get into that in the future. But that's
And
we'll have to
this
see.
is something you've brought up in the past too. Is like if their data says to them, look at all these people playing Sorks, maybe they could look at that and go, what is fun about Sorks for people above other classes, and why can't we add that somehow to the other classes?
Aha. Aha. So this gets to sort of my final point, and I think you probably have something similar. We'll see what you say to wrap it up. But my final point is, I would have done this in a different order. I certainly would have gone after first round, no nerfs, gone after the places where we needed buffs. Because here's what's going to happen. If you start with the nerf, even like me with the mercenary, Simo with the Sork, if you start with the nerf, then that's going to make me, for whatever reason, even if it's irrational, maybe, maybe I'm still, even if they nerf me enough that I'm still the top DPS possible, but I feel like I got nerfed, there's going to be some percentage of the players that are not going to want to play their merc anymore. What you've done, though, is you have not buffed the rest of the classes that need it. So now there's much fewer options. So now you're going to make me want to
Right.
quit my merc. And you haven't bothered to buff the ones that are in trouble. So I'm not going to want to play my Sork. Because my Sork, my Lightning
See,
Sork sucks.
right, you're right.
So what I would have done was first round, only the buffs for the ones that were at the bottom to bring them up a little bit. So that when you get to the nerfs, now you've got this whole, this whole set
But
of classes that did get a little bit of a buff. That maybe now I've got some options.
so I get what you're saying. You're saying that by doing the nerfs first, they're just making a new flavor of the month, which is going to be whatever is left when people can't choose the ones that are already underperforming anymore.
Right,
I mean,
right.
they have they
Because
feel they have to change their class. They're not going to pick the ones that are currently underperforming. So everyone's going to go in the same direction,
right,
and we'll have a new flavor of the month.
power techs suck, sorks suck, and now you're going to make mercs suck, and sages, and healing sorks suck. So you've sort of like made this really large margin of all of these classes where the perception is that they suck. That's not that's not where you want to start.
No, no, it's not good for the game.
No. So we'll see. If they move quickly and they bring up the other classes that need the buffs, and that's all part of it, and they get really quickly and they fix TK, Lightning, Sage Sorks, and if I delete my Merc and I rage quit my Merc and I go to my Sork or whatever I want to play and it feels good, then maybe it's fine. But I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see.
So they did post their changes to PT and Vanguard, and that was a class that's getting some buffs, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I think
Although, again, we'll go through that in future weeks. But so here's the three things, 4 bullet points that are getting buffed, and here's the 18 bullet points that are getting nerfed for Sork Sage
right.
healers.
So so kind of where I was going with that is I'm kind of imagining that they made like a chart of all the margins, like the Sork Sage, their margin away from where they wanted to be was the biggest,
Hmm.
and so that's why they're attacking it first, and they're not thinking nerf versus buff. They're just like, let's get this one done first because they have the biggest gap.
Yeah.
Maybe not the
And
best way to get it, but
right,
it might be how they're looking at it. That was speculation, but it would be an engineering thing to do.
right, right. Where's the biggest margin? And the biggest margins happen to be on the upside. Um, we won't even get into maybe don't do any nerfs, but bring up the bottom. Yes, there's a whole lot of work you would need to do because you're sort of making the content easier overall. But if I've been playing my Merc for 7 months, why is it really just that much of a cry and shame that I can get through I can get through an uprising as fast as the 30 seconds faster than I will be able to in the future? Is that really so bad? I don't know, but that's a separate topic. So I think in future weeks we'll break apart all of these changes with some of these classes. We're going to get more. We've gotten 4 sets so far. We've gotten Assassin, Hatred Assassin, Serenity Shadow. We've got an Arsenal Merc, Gunnery Commando. The third set is Pyrotech, Power Tech, Plasma Tech Vanguard, and the fourth set so far is Corruption Seer, Corruption Sork, and Seer Consular. So we've got those that will break down in the future, and we'll see what else comes as part of this first round. And as they get into the game, we'll see what they feel like. So it'll be an exciting summer as far as these balance changes go, and we'll see if I do rage quit my Merc and what I end up playing in the future.
You just gamble the summer
I'm
away.
just gonna gamble away the summer. I think that's a good plan. All right, I think with that, our EPC 199 droid here is ready to head out and get ready for his nerfs and or buffs as he rides out the summer in an escape pod broadcasting this podcast. Thanks to all of you for joining us on newoverlords.com, on iTunes, YouTube, or live on Twitch. We will stream again next Thursday night on twitch.tv/newoverlords around 10:30 p.m. Central. Please subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Twitter at Max the Gray and at AIESEMA. And certainly, as we always say, come find us on Jedi Covenant and ask us for an AIE Guild invite, because we would love to have you. And we will talk to you soon.
Later, everyone.